Welcome to me, where suspenseful, thrilling, and mysterious stories will draw you into a world where the lines between reality and fantasy seem to blur. When the night falls, when all the sounds gradually quiet down, leaving only your own heartbeat and breathing, that's when these stories begin. Tensions, unsolved mysteries, moments that will make you hold your breath in fear or curiosity, all are waiting for you ahead. Find a comfortable seat, dim the lights, and let this sound guide you on a journey that is not for the faint of heart. I want each of you to leave a comment sharing where you are in the world. And if you are enjoying the episodes, don't forget to give a like and subscribe to the channel now. Relax. Are you ready? If so, join me in the first story right now. Goodbye, Mary. It's funny how I spent my whole life forming relationships, working, trying to be a good person, and building something out of nothing to feel safe, secure, and happy. It's even funnier how it all went away in a matter of few days. A few days that rocked my world, ruined all my foundations, and forced me to take steps I would never imagine to have to take. My black boots slightly sink in the mud, and I swear at myself that I chose this specific day for such an unimportant matter. Didn't the weather prediction say it will rain all night? Maybe. I haven't paid much attention to things so trivial. I fix my black coat, seeing it has lifted slightly in the corner, and feel a cold breeze wash over my bare legs. I should have worn leggings or at least tights, but I couldn't find any black ones. And surely I should not be wearing any other color to the funeral. It's hardly a funeral, though. I am the only person here watching the freshly dug ground and the sun reflecting stone gravestone. Mary Ann Robinson, the grave says. Her date of birth and death are also engraved, but no other message, like others have. There are no loving daughter, or she left us too soon, or some cheesy poem quote about inevitable death and the horror of young people dying. She was only 26 years old. It definitely is too young to die. She's had her whole life ahead of her. And now, she's buried on some old, almost abandoned cemetery where no one will visit her, bring fresh flowers, or tend to her grave. Mary Ann was a fearful person. She was too scared to stand up to her toxic manager at work and let them bully her. She was in a relationship with a man she didn't love because being on her own terrified her. She never voiced her feelings, fought for what she believed, or chased her dreams. She was living an anxious life and never tried to change it. I sit down at the bench just a couple of steps away from the grave, and I keep looking at the stone as if it is going to speak to me, give me some words of comfort or reassurance. But nothing comes my way except the cold wind, a not very warm sun flashing my eyes. I take a deep breath and put my hands on my knees. You had it coming, I almost whisper, not wanting for my words to be stolen by the wind and scattered across the land. You very damn well had it coming, and you know it. Saying it doesn't ease my hurt. If anything, it makes me more angry. Because it is true. You should have quit it when you had a chance. It is too late now, I guess. I take another deep breath, trying to calm down my emotions. The sun hides behind the miserable clouds, and the windy breeze feels even colder now. My whole body shivers in response, and muscles tense up. A mostly cloudy and cold day is a perfect setting for funeral. Makes it easier to leave the graves behind and dive into the warmth of a car or a house. But not me. I can't leave just yet. Not until I finish what I started. Marianne lived in a belief that if she consciously stayed out of trouble and allowed people to walk all over her, she would be at peace. It worked for a while. The problems didn't seem like problems back then. She forgave everyone who hurt her, never questioned anyone's actions or motives, agreed to everything she was thrown at. It was the ultimate goal, wasn't it? Until it stopped working. The trouble came looking for her, and she couldn't keep it away, regardless of how hard she tried. That was the first time she fought back, stood her ground, and followed her beliefs. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. And now, she's stuck in this endless loop of bad decisions she can never make right. And it still hurts me to know that Marianne will never be fully free. I glance at my purse that I placed next to me on the bench and swallow hard, feeling my anxiety rise once again. It has to be done. I remind myself, hoping it will bring me some courage. It doesn't, but it was worth a try. It has been a while since that information has been dropped on me, and the steps I need to take been explained. I have had enough time to process and digest everything, yet I'm still worried. It is an incredibly serious situation, and I cannot predict how this will affect me in the future. Yet I have no choice. The worst thing has already happened. Now, I just have to keep covering my tracks to stay hidden, stay a shadow that no one can catch. And killing Marianne Robinson was the first step. I reach for my bag, take out her passport, and a small, handheld shovel. The top corner of the passport is already snipped off, as per the instructions from the government received when I registered Mary's death. The next steps seem easy to make, but yet feel the hardest. They feel final, as if killing someone is not final enough. Reluctantly, I open the passport and look at the photo. I used to look so mediocre back then, with my uneven fringe, refusal to wear any makeup, official and modest clothes. I didn't even smile for that picture. Apparently, it was the rules. I then glance at the name written next to the photo, and I take another deep breath. My passport is still valid for another 2 years. Or it would be, hadn't I cut off the corner. But it doesn't matter. I am dead. Officially, I had to die. The work I will be doing is dangerous, risky, and very important. All the ties to my previous life had to be cut, and that's why Marianne had to die. For Cassie to be born, I approach the grave and kneel on the grass. With a pounding heart, I dig a foot-deep hole into the fresh ground and gently place the passport there. After filling the hole back up, I stand up and keep staring at my grave. "Goodbye, Mary," I whisper, with a single tear rolling down my cheek. I don't wipe it. I allow it to slowly drop on the ground. The above story ends, but the suspense and thrill have never stopped. Right here is another equally interesting story. Please continue listening. The funeral of Evelyn Warren. The chapel was too quiet. Grace sat in the front row, her hands tightly clenched in her lap. She couldn't stop staring at the closed casket, the weight of it pressing down on her chest. Her mother, Evelyn Warren, was supposed to be in there. Gone. The whole world seemed to have shifted under her feet. But Grace couldn't fully accept it. Not when the last time she saw her mom, she was barely clinging to life in that hospital room. The pastor spoke about Evelyn's life, about her kindness, her strength, her love for her family. Grace barely heard him. Her mind kept drifting back to the hospital, the soft beeping of the machines, the moments of whispered conversation between her and the nurses. "She's not going to make it," they'd said, and everyone had gathered around, waiting for the inevitable. But how had they gotten it so wrong? How was she really gone? A door creaked open, faint, but loud enough to break the silence. Grace's eyes snapped up instinctively. The air in the room seemed to change, thickening with something she couldn't place. At first, it was just the soft sound of the door, but then she noticed people in the back of the chapel, turning their heads. It wasn't just the noise. There was something in the way the air shifted, something tense. Something didn't feel right. At first, Grace didn't see anyone. She just heard the door. But then, she caught a glimpse of a figure stepping through, standing still in the doorway. A woman. Her figure barely visible in the dim light. Grace's stomach dropped. The figure was too still, too stiff. She couldn't see her face, just the outline of someone standing there, looking almost out of place. But then, the figure stepped forward. It was a woman, wearing a simple dress, her hair falling loosely, almost wild, around her face. Grace's heart skipped a beat. There was something about the way the woman moved, about the way she stood there, her presence pulling every eye in the room toward her. something in Grace's gut twisted. She knew that woman. She knew her all too well. Her breath caught in her throat. Grace stood up slowly, her legs shaking. The woman wasn't talking, wasn't even moving, just standing there. But it didn't matter. Grace's eyes were locked onto her, a strange panic flooding her chest. It was like something inside her was telling her this wasn't a mistake. "Mom," Grace whispered, the words barely leaving her mouth. But the woman didn't answer. She stood still, her eyes scanning the room. There was something about her, about the way she looked, like she was lost or confused. Grace couldn't breathe. Every instinct screamed that it wasn't possible. She was just imagining things. But the figure, that woman, had to be her mom. Her voice trembled as she repeated the word. "Mom?" The woman blinked. Once, twice. She took a step forward, her gaze still unfocused. Grace took a hesitant step toward her, and then, slowly, the figure's eyes found Grace. They locked, and for a brief moment, the room fell completely silent. The woman's lips parted, but the words were slow, unsure. I'm not dead." The room seemed to hold its breath. Grace's mind was spinning. Her body was still frozen, a wave of confusion and disbelief washing over her. She wanted to ask a million questions, but no words came. The woman, Evelyn, took another step forward, her face pale, her expression distant, as if she were struggling to remember why she was here. "I didn't die," she whispered again, almost to herself, before her eyes finally met Grace's. "I'm not dead." Grace's mouth went dry. Her hands shook. Her mom, standing there, alive, and looking like she hadn't just been on the brink of death. It didn't make sense. She couldn't make sense of it. Not when she had just signed the papers hours ago. Not when she had seen the doctor shake his head. Not when the nurses had told her it was over. She took a step closer, her heart racing. "Mom? How are you? What's going on?" Evelyn's eyes were distant, like she was still trying to piece everything together. "I don't know, Grace," she said, her voice low, almost trembling. "I don't know. I was in the hospital, and then I woke up somewhere. I don't remember how or why. It doesn't make sense." Grace felt the floor beneath her shift. It wasn't just her confusion anymore. The whole room was holding its breath. The whispers around her, the people shifting in their seats. It all felt like the world was tilting, like something that should have been impossible was somehow here, in front of her. Her mother was here, alive, but no one knew why. A voice broke through the silence, sharp and incredulous. What do you mean you woke up somewhere? It was Mark, Evelyn's husband, standing at the back. His voice was trembling, but it was louder than the rest. How could you just wake up? You were dead, Evelyn. Evelyn turned slowly toward him, her gaze steady but tired. I don't know what they told you, Mark, she said, each word heavy. I don't know what happened, but I'm not dead. I'm standing here. I'm alive. Mark shook his head, his face pale, his hands clenched by his sides. This doesn't make sense. I saw them roll you out. I saw them. His voice broke for a moment. I thought we were done. I thought I was burying you today. People exchanged uncertain looks, some beginning to stand, others shrinking back into their seats. Everything had been turned upside down in an instant. Grace's mind was racing. But the hospital, the machines, Her voice faltered, as if the words themselves were too heavy. I was there, Mom. I saw you. I told you I loved you. She couldn't finish. The memory of her mom lying there, so fragile, barely clinging to life, was still too fresh. It didn't make sense. How could she be standing here now? So normal. Evelyn stepped closer, but there was no comfort in it. She wasn't the same Evelyn that Grace had known. She seemed distant, even when she stood right in front of her. It was like she was here physically, but her presence was off. She looked like someone trying to remember who they used to be. I don't know why they told you that, Evelyn said softly. I don't know what happened, but I swear to you, Grace, I wasn't dead. I didn't die, but we were all told you were gone, Grace whispered, her voice cracking. Why didn't you come to us? I couldn't, Grace. I don't know what happened, but I couldn't remember how to get back. Everything felt so strange, like I was still in the hospital, like I wasn't allowed to leave. Grace couldn't breathe. None of this was making sense. I need answers, Mark said, taking a few quick steps toward Evelyn, his face twisted with disbelief. You don't just get to show up after we've all mourned you, after we've buried you, and say you're fine. I heard them tell me you were gone. His voice was sharp, raw. What is this? Some kind of joke? I'm not joking, Mark, Evelyn said, her tone suddenly hard, but there was a weariness behind it. I'm not here to hurt anyone. I'm not here to confuse you. I'm just telling you the truth. I don't know what happened, but I'm not dead. The room was silent again, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Grace wanted to scream, to shake her mom and demand answers, but she could only stand there, frozen. The casket behind her, her mother's casket, was a cruel reminder of everything that was supposed to be real, of everything that wasn't. Maybe you should sit down, someone whispered from the back. Grace couldn't tell who it was. Evelyn's eyes flickered around the room, scanning the faces. And for the first time since she entered, she seemed to register how many people were watching. Some were looking at her in disbelief, others in fear, unsure of whether they should approach or retreat. "I'm not trying to hurt anyone," Evelyn repeated, her voice quieter now, though there was something like sorrow in her tone. "But I can't explain this. I don't understand it. I don't understand how I'm standing here, either. I don't understand any of this." Grace felt tears threaten to spill, but she fought them back. The world was too heavy. It felt like her brain couldn't catch up with what was happening. The way her mother looked, alive, but not the same, was like a dream, like something she'd imagined in her worst nightmare. And yet, here she was, in front of them, breathing, standing, alive. "I'm sorry," Evelyn said, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry I wasn't there. I don't know what happened. But I'm here now." Grace, standing there, couldn't shake the feeling that the answers weren't going to come easy. And maybe they never would. Let's continue with the next no less thrilling stories. In the name of the park, they say you never really know what someone is like. Not truly. Life has a funny way of showing you. Coincidences, they call them. Those little twists of fate that seem too good to be true. Like how, just as the park started filling up with the wrong kinds of people, they all began to disappear, one by one. Strange, isn't it? I've lived here for decades, in this little house with its flower boxes and its white shutters, watching the seasons change, watching the people come and go at the park across the street. For so long, the park was perfect. Flowers bloomed each spring, and the trees provided shade for the frolicking that took place under them. The good people were always there, the ones who respected it. There was Mrs. Calloway, who had walked her poodle, Franz, at the same time every morning for 20 years. There was George, the retired schoolteacher, who read his newspaper on the same bench while sipping his thermos of coffee. The mothers with their strollers, the elderly couples arm in arm, the joggers who nodded politely as they passed. These were my people. But then the bad ones came. First, it was the teenagers, those little delinquents with their cigarettes and their loud music, loitering around the swings, leaving their garbage behind. They carved their nonsense into the benches, foul words that I won't repeat, marking their territory like stray dogs. I scolded them at first, wagging my finger, telling them they should be ashamed. They only laughed. They had no respect for anything. Not for me, not for the park, not for the memories of the good people who had been there before them. But they weren't laughing for long. Then came the couple, the awful couple, who would play disc golf and argue the entire time. He was a burly man with a voice like a fairhorn, and she was a wayfish thing, shrill and unrelenting, like a bird. They didn't just argue, they screamed, and I even think they smoked marijuana. I would try to enjoy my walks, but their voices would pierce through the trees, ruining everything. Clem, Ollie, and Marcus, my Yorkies, would cower in fear as they approached us. It was always about money, or about some other woman, or about how she was ungrateful. And he was a brute. She used much more colorful language. The sound of their discs clattering against metal mixed with their venomous words, polluting the air. Their presence felt like a stain on what should have been a sanctuary, a place of peace. I could almost hear the park groaning under their weight. And then there were the worst ones of all. The dealers. I noticed them sneaking into the park, lurking by the back benches where the trees grew thickest. They wore hoodies, their eyes darting around as they exchanged small bags for crumpled bills. I knew exactly what was happening. I'd seen enough crime reports to recognize the signs, and to think they were doing this when there were children and teenagers in the vicinity. The neighborhood wasn't safe anymore. My park wasn't safe. I saw them whispering to people who passed by, shifting anxiously, always watching their backs. I knew their kind. I had seen the stories on the news. Violence always followed them, and the police did nothing, and yet people ignored it. They walked past, either too afraid or too indifferent to say anything. I called our local police station, and they only told me they would send an officer to check it out. I will tell you, this did not happen. As I watched from my window and saw no police officers in the area, I did report this as well. But I knew the truth. If you want something done right, you must do it yourself. I had to do something. You can never judge a book by its cover, they say. People look at me and they see an old woman, slightly hunched, dressed in my sensible sweaters and shoes, walking my 3 little dogs. They see my tidy house with the white shutters and the flower boxes, and they assume I am exactly what I appear to be. They don't see the woman who was married to a cruel man for 20 years, who learned how to endure, how to be patient, how to bide her time until the right moment came, who realized sometimes something must be lost to be gained, as was the case in preserving peace for my 3 sons. They don't see the woman who grew up on a farm, who learned early how to break a chicken's neck in one swift motion. They don't know how strong my hands really are. Desperate times call for desperate measures, don't they? The teenagers were first. It wasn't hard. One of them, a particularly mouthy one with a sneer that made my blood boil, was walking home alone one night. It was almost too easy. A single strike with the tire iron I kept in my shed, and he crumpled like a rag doll. He and his friends did not hang out at the park after that, so far as I could tell. It was strange how quickly the others took the hint. The arguing couple was next. I followed them, listening to their voices rise in fury. They were on the edge of the park, past the old fence, where no one went anymore. She was crying, and he was yelling, his voice shaking the leaves. I didn't even hesitate. A push was all it took, just one push, and his big, lumbering body toppled over the edge of the ravine. The silence was so sudden, it was almost beautiful. It was as if the park could finally exhale. She turned to me, eyes wide, lips trembling. I thought she would scream, but she didn't. She ran. And I let her, because I knew she wouldn't tell. Women like her know better than to cross women like me. And maybe she will use this second chance to make some better life choices. The dealers were harder. They moved in groups, cautious, always looking over their shoulders. But people like them, they get greedy. They trust the wrong people. One by one, they fell. Each disappearance, a small victory. The police didn't even look into it too hard. Junkies, they called them. No big loss. I made sure they disappeared quietly. A little patience, a little careful planning. No one questioned it. You wouldn't suspect I could even be capable of these deeds. The park is quiet now. The good people have returned, along with the lilac blooms and the koi fish in the pond. Mrs. Calloway walks Franz without fear. George reads his paper in peace. The mothers push their strollers without looking over their shoulders. Their babies have grown and play freely on the park equipment without having to read rubbish. Soon, a new batch of these little lambs will be springing about. The joggers smile again. It's so nice that the park has cleaned up, they say. Feels safe again. Isn't it amazing that all those rough types just stopped coming here? I wonder what happened, Mrs. Calloway mentioned yesterday, as we paused to dispose of our dog droppings before exiting the park. I smile back, but then, just as we step onto the sidewalk, I notice something. A new teenager sitting on the swings, head down, hoodie pulled tight, just sitting, watching. I grip the leash in my hands, my knuckles whitening, because it is safe, and I intend to keep it that way. And the next story will be told right away. Please listen carefully. Runaway Bride. Hopping onto a random train in the middle of the night was not the best idea Elise ever had. Not her worst, but a close second to when she was 13 and slept in the library overnight, only to wake up surrounded by cleaning pixies, surrounded by luggage and the smell of old clothes. She shifts her legs to avoid having them fall asleep before the train reaches the next stop. In other carts, there are no doubt people dining and laughing with glasses of champagne in their hands. She wishes she could join them in their revelry. But leaving her hiding space in a torn, dirt-stained wedding dress won't bring her the right sort of attention. Elise only wanted to be sure that no one had altered it without her knowledge, like her mother-in-law-to-be threatened to do when she failed to convince her to wear her gaudy dress from her own wedding. She didn't expect to hear screaming from the adjacent room when she tested how it fit. Glass bottles filled with wine for the guests breaking against the adjoining walls, the cries only stopping at the sound of a sickening thud. Her groom's voice only relieved her for a moment before she heard it discuss where to dispose of the body. She acted on instinct, opening a window and running until she found the train ready to depart. Tears come unbidden after what feels like centuries, thinking of only escape and surviving. Her plans of marrying the man of her dreams are now as broken as her heart. Her eyes grow heavy after her sorrow drains her of tears that further stained her once beautiful white gown. Not even the pain in her blooded feet could keep her awake as adrenaline faded from her body, replaced with exhaustion. Time passes her by as she slept, leaving her ignorant to the moment when the train stops and she's no longer alone. Someone large and strong grabs her, pulling her forward to the point where she nearly falls. Despite her panicked cries, Elise is dragged across the floor, her body already sore from her escape, her limbs unable to move from the mixture of fear and defeat. This is it, my end. They'll take me back to the estate, if not the chapel. My murderous groom will say I'm just a frightened bride with cold feet. And then it will be my body buried somewhere unknown. No one will know I'm missing until I'm nothing but bones. They take her into a train cart filled with people in fancy clothes, tossing her into an empty booth, her head falling against the window, exposing the darkness she used to cover her escape. She doesn't recognize the area behind the glass. Nothing but trees with no sign of human influence. Despite the throbbing in her skull, Elise turns her head to the gawking crowd staring back at her in confusion and horror, their meal interrupted by her unexpected entrance. Only a lone man in a trench coat and wide-brimmed hat has a neutral expression when looking at her. "Is this everyone?" the man asks a uniformed man, the one she assumes brought her here. "Yes, sir. All the passengers are accounted for, and our stowaway." "Any sign of the necklace?" "No, sir." The man in the trench coat sighs in frustration. Elise shrinks into herself as the eyes surrounding her seem to search through her soul. "Who is she?" one whispers. "I don't know. I don't recognize her." "Wait, isn't there a wedding this morning? The Von Gray and Carlyle families, right? It can't be Elise Carlyle. She wouldn't be caught dead in such a state. Besides, why would she be running from her own wedding? They've known each other for years." Elise opens her mouth to explain everything, yet no words would come. Try as she might, The only sound she can make is a strangled cry. The man in the trench coat walks down the small path separating the row of booths, hands behind his back in thought. Everyone else remains where they are, their panicked whispers filling the small space with dread. "Detective, what are your plans?" someone asks. "I already have the train staff searching for the missing jewelry. The conductor is aware of this, and I've informed him to keep the train here until the necklace is found. If the thief wishes to reach Bridgeway, they will have to confess. Otherwise, we'll wait until the local police arrive to interrogate everyone." The chatter rises to frustrated protests. The person who dismissed her identity, a middle-aged woman with a large hat decorated with silk flowers, rose from her seat. "This is preposterous. I have somewhere to be, and being fashionably late isn't an option. If I'm not in the pews at the chapel with the other guests, when the bride walks down the aisle, the shame will ruin my reputation and standing in society." The detective ignores her outburst to write down something in his notepad. The older woman, realizing her declaration failed to sway the detective, reaches for her purse, opening it and searching until she pulls out a hand mirror. Its metal frame shaped into soft vines with glowing stones for flowers. Elise recognizes her seeing mirror as the work of a famous artisan in Bridgeway, the place where the chapel awaited her, and what she once thought would be the start of her new life. The older woman leaves her seat, not making any effort to hide what she's doing from the detective or the other passengers. If he suspects something, he doesn't show it as he eyes the passengers. The older woman finds a small corner with an empty booth, turning her back to the others as she presses the flowers and whispers a few words to connect with another seeing mirror. Elise can only see a flash of light from the mirror before the detective takes position across from her, blocking her view. "Care to answer some questions?" Elise tries once more to speak. And again, only a sound of pain escapes her lips. The detective's hardened expression shifts slightly as she pretends to write with an invisible pen on the table. "Here, you can use mine. Now, first question. How did you get on the train?" Elise writes down a few words. "Open door. Got on before the train left." "And why did you get on the train?" "Running away. Heard a murder. Groom and groomsmen. Don't know who was killed, but was scared." "Your future husband and his groomsmen killed someone? What else can you tell me?" "Screaming, fighting, glass shattering, silence. Then groom says they need to hide the body." The detective continues to ask her questions, Elise responding with what few words she could conjure from her mind without fear settling in. When the interrogation is over, Elise feels hollow, yet despondent. The detective thanks her for her cooperation, moving on to a passenger in a heavy wool coat. Yet, before he could ask a single question, two things happen at the same time. A uniformed woman enters the train with a necklace of flawless diamonds in hand. and the older woman throws her mirror against the wall. The detective springs into action, reaching the staff member in seconds. The older woman turns her attention to Elise, her expression changing from rage to concern. She approaches Elise while the others are distracted with the reveal of the missing necklace. "You're Elise, aren't you?" Elise nods, hope rising in her chest. "Oh, I should have known." The older woman returns to her snobbish attitude in an instant. "Of course, when I connected to my cousin's mirror, she was certain nothing was the matter, or she would have told me. With this theft of your wedding gift, I worried I would be late, so naturally, I had to give the bride a proper blessing to alleviate the results of my tardiness. And when the mirror was given to the bride, you won't believe who I saw. Did the Von Gray family servants think so little of me that I wouldn't recognize one of them from the times I've spent with their mistress? The dress wasn't even embroidered." She pats Elise's head as if she were a child, while it swirls in confusion at the news. Poor thing, forced to play in a foolish man's game. No doubt he believed the veil would hide her identity until the priest declared them husband and wife. No matter, everything will be revealed soon enough. I told my cousin to inform your mother that your groom has a convoluted plan to wed another woman of a lowly station. Once we reach Bridgeway, all will be well. Elise is not certain the older woman's assumptions are correct, but the thought of salvation is enough to set her mind at ease. Once the train resumes its journey, the passengers return to a modicum of normalcy, talking about mundane things as they ate their now cold food. Elise's own appetite returned as she dined with the older woman, as she spoke of the scandal that will erupt once the truth is revealed. With time, the wheels break upon the rails as the station of Bridgeway comes into view. The familiar face of her mother, eyes stained with sorrow, light up once Elise races onto the platform into her warm embrace. Just when you think all the weird stuff has been told, the next story will make you think again. I didn't mean to do it. I didn't mean to do it. The words echoed in my mind as I stood there in the dark, my hands shaking, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the sound of the storm outside. The wind howled through the trees, and the rain hammered against the windows. It was a night that felt like it was made for horrors. But the real terror, my terror, was already inside. I stared down at his body, lying in a pool of crimson that seemed to stretch out, devouring everything it touched. His once bright eyes, filled with laughter and warmth, were now dull and empty. His chest was still, the rhythmic rise and fall I had come to know so well, now forever silenced. It wasn't supposed to end like this. We weren't supposed to be here. I never meant for any of it to happen. The night had started out differently. We were celebrating. Well, I thought we were. It had been a long week for both of us. John had been working late at the office, and I'd been buried in a dozen little tasks at home. We barely saw each other, only passing like two ships in the night. So, when he suggested dinner out, I'd jumped at the chance to spend some quality time together. We went to that little Italian restaurant we loved, the one tucked away in the corner of the city, with the flickering candles and soft music. Everything felt just right. The kind of evening that reminded me of why we had fallen in love in the first place. However, as the night wore on, something changed. Something was off. Something I couldn't explain. It started when John leaned in and rested his hand on mine across the table. He smiled, but there was something in his eyes I couldn't figure out. Was it uncertainty? Maybe it was just me. I hadn't been sleeping well at all. We had building tension between us for months. First, it was little things that were simple to overlook, but now they were impossible to ignore. "What's on your mind?" I asked, trying to smile back. John sighed and leaned back in his chair, looking down at his plate for a moment before meeting my gaze again. "It's nothing, really. Just work stuff. You know how it is." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed him. I never did. When John didn't want to talk about something, he wouldn't. But then, as we left the restaurant, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box. I couldn't help but smile, hoping that maybe he was attempting to rekindle the spark we'd once had. He'd always been good at that, surprising me and keeping the romance alive in his own way. "What's this?" I asked, teasing him as I took the box from his hand. "Just a little something," he said, his voice sounding odd. I opened it, and inside was a ring. But it wasn't a shiny, sparkly diamond ring that you'd expect as a romantic gesture. This ring was old and looked like perhaps it had been passed down through generations. The ring was tarnished, and the stone had a crack in it. "It's beautiful," I said, though I wasn't sure what I meant by that. There was something that didn't sit right in my gut. "Do you like it?" he asked. I nodded, but found it difficult to smile genuinely. I felt chills all over. "Where did you get this?" I asked, trying to sound nonchalant. Something felt wrong. John didn't answer right away. His eyes had shifted, almost like he was hiding something. He looked away before attempting to look at me again. "It's been in the family for years. It's special. I thought you would like it." "Special," I echoed. My fingers traced the ring's surface, and it was cold, even colder than metal typically is. I could feel the tension between us. It wasn't just about the ring. It was deeper than that. Something had been building for a long time. John as acting odd, avoiding my eyes, trembling as he reached for the car keys. But we didn't say anything more on the drive home. It was quiet, other than the rain that had started. Everything was blurred by the water running down the windshield. The wipers were thankfully filling our silence. When we arrived home, we went through our routine of getting ready for bed. John took a long shower while I tried to relax in the living room. But my mind wouldn't shut off. I kept thinking about the ring, about the way it felt in my hands, and John's strange behavior. When John finally came out of the shower, he walked past me without saying a word, heading toward the bedroom. "John, wait," I said, my voice shaking. "Is something going on? Something you're not telling me?" He stood at the bedroom door and turned to me. He stared for a moment, with just a blank expression. Then he sighed and walked toward me. He sat down on the couch next to me. "I've been thinking a lot," he began with a low voice. "About us. About everything." My heart thudded loudly as I waited for him to continue. "I think we're drifting, Sarah," he said, his words immediately taking my breath away. "I just don't know if we can fix this anymore. We've been drifting for months. It felt like the world was tilting." I couldn't breathe. "Drifting?" I whispered. "What do you mean? We're fine. We're busy. We're just busy, that's all. We can fix this and make it work." John shook his head. "I'm not sure anymore. We've both been pretending. We're just not the same people we were when we got married, Sarah. I'm tired. Really tired. I don't think I can keep pretending." I wanted to cry, to scream, but I couldn't. All I could to do was sit there, trying to figure out what he meant. None of it made sense. I'd been trying so hard to hold everything together, and now it felt like it was slipping through my grasp. Before I could say anything, he stood up and went to the bedroom. I heard the rustle of sheets and the soft thud of him getting into bed. I didn't know what to do or say. I sat there for a long time, what felt like hours. The silence was killing me. Finally, I was unable to stand the distance between us any longer, so I went to the bedroom and stood in the doorway. John was lying on his side, with his back facing me. I couldn't see his face, but I felt the coldness coming from him. "John," I whispered. He didn't respond. "I can't lose you," I said, my voice cracking. "Please don't give up. We can work through this. I'll do anything." Still, there was no answer. Something inside me snapped. I was frustrated and scared of losing him. I didn't know what came over me, but I crossed the bedroom, grabbed the ring from the nightstand, and chucked it across the room. The silence was broken by the ring hitting the wall. "Do you really think this is going to fix everything?" I shouted. "This stupid ring? A symbol of what? The lies we've been telling each other?" Finally, John turned to face me, his eyes wide. Was he angry? Scared? But before he could say anything, I saw it. Something sharp and dangerous glinting in his hand. He had a knife. I didn't see the motion coming. 1 minute, I was standing there, shouting at him. And the next, I felt the cold metal press into my side. It wasn't deep, but it stopped me in my tracks, clutching my wound. "John," I whispered, my voice trembling with disbelief. "What are you?" But he didn't answer. He didn't move. I was frozen, trying to understand what had just happened. My breath came in shallow gasps. In a panic, I grabbed at the knife, trying to push it away. I stumbled back, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of what happened. Then, in a blur of motion, I grabbed the nearest thing I could get, a heavy glass vase, and swung it at him. It hit him in the face, and he staggered backward, the knife slipping from his hand. But it wasn't enough to stop him. He lunged toward me, and I fought back with everything I had. My mind was full of fear, confusion, and anger. I didn't know what I was doing anymore, or how it happened. All I knew was I needed to protect myself. The next thing I knew, John was on the floor. His body was crumpled, his unblinking wide eyes staring up at me. His chest no longer rose and fell. I didn't mean to do it. The above story has ended. Let's listen to the next story. 2 monsters. Anatolius's home had been destroyed. Apart from the crackling of fires, still eagerly munching at the dregs of what used to be beautiful greenery, the island was silent. Anatolius might not have noticed the army behind him, were he marching on an adjacent kingdom. This kingdom, his kingdom, had been razed. Every home they passed was either a pile of ashes or the blackened husk of a stone wall. Anatolius pressed on. Nepheli had to be okay. She'd been alone with Anacreon for 6 years. He still had to apologize for that. He remembered the linen sheets she'd wrapped around their boy as she carried him. The boy with her blue eyes and the golden hair Anatolius himself had been born with. Hair that would by now be darkening to a soft brown. He'd been looking forward to catch up with them, with the goings-on of the kingdom, with the childhood he'd missed out on. As they walked through the town, he heard several of his men cry out. The sounds of weapons dropping to the stone roads and the sound of feet racing off. Several corpses dotted the paths. Most were burned beyond recognition, but a few wore helms bearing a crest that had been melted by the heat. None of his men, of course. Some army that had sacked the place. But some didn't wear armor. Anatolius was trying not to think about that. He had to see to Nepheli first. He had to. His sandal hit an uneven patch of stone in the path, and he stopped. Behind him, the sounds of his army rustled to a stop. No, he stumbled forward, the dying light of the day casting long shadows that blended with the soot-blackened stone, as if to trick him into thinking that it was supposed to look like this. The courtyard was in disarray. The once beautiful gardens that Nephili had so meticulously tended to were reduced to cinders. The 2 cypress trees at its entrance, little more than stumps. A bench lay in a heap of broken stone. The doors, at first glance, were open, though taking another trembling step forward, Anatolius realized there was no door in the hollow mouth leading into what was once his home. "Sir," Anatolius jumped. He'd thought most of the men had run off, seeing to their own homes, but Theodoros stood behind him, standing to attention. His eyes were hard, as if he were pretending to be blind to the destruction. Theodoros had fled his home, a country to the south, one with gods like Niam and Anansi, rather than Zeus and Hermes. He remembered helping the man out of a shipwreck when they were boys, making a comment about being surprised he'd survived the wrath of Charybdis, and realizing the boy couldn't understand his words. He didn't even have the language to tell Anatolius his name. Theodoros was the name they'd given him in Liu, and the name that had stuck. Apart from Anatolius, he didn't really have a family here. "Theo," he said, stepping forward. He'd intended to make it a long, confident stride, but his foot skidded in the ash and rubble. "You don't have to see this. I must," he said. His eyes grew soft as he regarded his king. "If only to keep you on your feet." Anatolius frowned at him, then took a deep breath and nodded. He ducked into the doorway. The humble palace was illuminated by a wide hole in the wall, breaching through the ceiling of the upper floor. The smell of charred flesh, stale after days of abandonment, still hung faintly in the air. Anatolius pulled up his cloak to cover his nose. "There could be survivors," he said doubtfully. "Check the cellars. Someone could have hidden there from the fire. I'll go check my bedchambers." Theodoros opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again, giving his king a nod. He ducked into the kitchen and disappeared from view. Anatolius put one foot on the bottom step, taking a deep breath to steel himself, regretting it immediately as the odors seemed to coagulate in his nostrils. He readjusted his cloak about his nose and headed up the stairs, dreading what he'd find at the top. They could still live, he tried to reassure himself. If they're not up here, Theo might find them in the cellar. Perhaps Anacreon was hiding between the wine barrels when they came. He paused on the steps. They? Who was they? The city had been burnt to the ground intentionally. There were dead soldiers among the townspeople. But who on earth would have this big a problem with him? He almost turned around to go find one of those dead soldiers and examine the corpse more thoroughly. But he shook his head and took another step up. "Don't distract yourself," as his words echoed in the still air. He froze. The sound of something rustling in the rooms overhead were distinct now. A scuttling of feet and fabric. Someone was here. One hand on the hilt of his xiphus, he charged up the stairs. It could be Nepheli, but it could be someone else entirely. He threw his shoulder through the remains of the door, barging into his rooms amid a shower of soot. He then froze. His chambers, now a single room with the walls burned or knocked over, were destroyed. He shook his head, refusing to let himself be distracted by the destruction, and turned to the bed. Their bed. His blood ran cold. Nepheli, thin and gaunt, staring at him in disbelief and fear, lay in the bed. At first, he thought she must be tied there, with how little she moved. But as she lifted her trembling hand, he realized she was simply too weak. With effort, she outstretched a finger to point at him. No, not at him. Behind him, he spun in one fluid motion, drawing his sword. Initially, he saw nothing but the darkened corner of the room, blackened by shadows and soot. Then a low, dark chuckle echoed, and two glowing pinpricks of red appeared from the void. And here I was, half expecting her to die before you arrived, said a smooth voice, a shape separating itself from the shadows and resolving into a strange figure. It stepped forward, some kind of humanoid relative of Chimera, Anatolius thought. Its legs were smooth, dark red, scaled things, talons clinking on the stone floor between the tattered remnants of a pelt, the long, thin end of a reptilian tail whipped around. The figure's face remained in shadow, apart from its eyes, but Anatolius could just make out the shape of their head, adorned with wicked horns that swept back and arched up into points like some cruel wave. "Who are you?" he demanded in horror. "Not what?" The being chuckled, bringing a hand up to rest on their hip. It had those same dark red scales, same hooked black talons, clashing with the clean white of the creature's exomus. Most people ask me, what? I've had many of these conversations, King. Yet you're the first to ask after my identity first. I'll commend you on that. I know what you are. You're a monster. You brought your army here to destroy my people, and I will know why. Speak. The figure, infuriatingly, remained still. Another chuckle rumbling in their chest. Anatolius could practically hear Nepheli's bones vibrating as she trembled in fear or exhaustion, perhaps both. What had this thing done to her? "It's quite close to dark," they said, drawing his attention back. "Are you certain you want to strike now? What's that supposed to mean?" He shot back. One more dark chuckle. One more tremulous heartbeat. The sun was barely a blood-stained sliver cresting the windowsill. Then it was gone. the light dying from the room. The figure swept toward him. Only his reflexes saved him, his foot swinging out as he pivoted, trying to catch the creature unawares. The first thing Anatolius had learned in war was that a soldier's sword wasn't his only weapon. An instant later, he was staring at the ceiling through star-clouded eyes, wheezing for breath. The creature's tail tip unwound from his ankle, and the thing stepped over to look down at him, a silver grin cracking the violet dusk light. "You should have gotten her and gotten out," they said, and lunged down at him. Cat. Pain greeted him as he woke. Head muddled, he groaned, reaching up to rub at a crick in his neck. A hand grabbed his wrist, and he cursed under his breath. "That thing, let go!" The words, though attempted to be forceful, came out as a pained hiss. He glared up at the figure above him, reaching for his sword. A moment later, he realized it wasn't the thing from earlier, but a more familiar face. Theodoros. Anatolius relaxed. What happened? Theodoros loosened his grip on his wrist, readjusting to help Anatolius sit up. There was a pain in his eyes, Anatolius realized. Or was it guilt? He shook his head to clear it, feeling a lot like he was nursing a hangover without having drunk the wine. "I am sorry, Your Majesty." Anatolius looked around the room. It was still in the same disheveled state as before, only now a huddled mass lay on the ground beside him. The creature, he realized. Its tail was still coiled lightly around his leg, but it lay in a puddle of blood. And Anatolius realized with shock that the sword whose handle he'd been reaching for was buried in its chest. Looking over the thing now, it seemed so much smaller, so much less imposing. He could see its face clearly now. Nearly human, but for a dusting of crimson scales across its cheeks. Had they been that bright before? Or had he been imagining it in the distorting shadows of the encroaching night that collected in patches around the outside corners of its hollow silver eyes, framing its face? It was a woman, too. More sets of horns studding her jawline, almost like facial hair. Her mouth hung open, revealing a set of fangs whose tips were dipped in blood. Anatolius reached up again, and this time Theodoros didn't stop him as he reached for that crick in his neck. No, not a crick, he realized, hissing in pain as his fingertips brushed a set of puncture wounds. "This thing, what is it?" he asked as he dropped his hand, looking up at his friend. Theodoros shook his head. He didn't know. Anatolius stood, feeling dizzy and weak as he got to his feet. He looked over to the bed, toward the unmoving lump under the sheets. Theodoros got up, but if his intent was to help, he moved too late, as Anatolius stumbled to the side of the bed and fell to his knees beside it. His wife, her once beautiful face, now sunken in and bloodless, stared with dead eyes back at him. He reached up with trembling hands, one hand cupping her cheek, the other reaching for her hand. It was still outstretched, with the pointer finger out. She must have used the last of her strength to try and warn me, he thought, leaning up to kiss her forehead as tears collected in his eyes. Without looking up, he said, "Where is my son?" Theodoros was silent for a long moment. "I found him in the cellars," he finally said. "Dead? The smoke must have killed him." Theodoros usually sounded stern. Even in battle, he'd never cracked. But he loved Anatolius's family just as much as he himself did. And now, their loss had broken something in him. If the pain in his voice was anything to go by, Anatolius took a deep breath, then stood, still holding his wife's hand. The night before he'd left for war, he'd promised to return. He'd promised to her worried tears that she'd see him again. That promise had been fulfilled, but it felt hollow now. A sudden rage seized him. He dropped her hand. Then, despite his weakness, he stormed to the side of the creature who had attacked him. The thing that had ransacked his kingdom, destroyed his home, murdered his people and his family. He reached out and ripped the sword from her chest, scoring it down her belly to upend her innards onto his floor. "How dare you!" he snarled. Blood arced as he swung the blade down, then sprayed out as he drove the blade into the dead monster again. "How dare you! How dare you! You God's damned rat! You disgusting wretch! I was loyal to the gods. I commanded an army. I destroyed my enemy. How dare you spit in my face like this?" With each heartbeat, he swung the sword again and again and again. Blood drenched the floor, splattered the walls, and soaked up the ash from the fire, coating his clothing in sprays of red and black. A bit of it got in his eyes, his mouth, as he screamed his defiance. He didn't care, even as he tasted it going down. He didn't stop until the body was unrecognizable. Chunks of meat decorated with once fine fabric and putrid viscera. Even then, he didn't want to stop. But his fatigued muscles gave out, his arms refusing to lift the blade. He glared at the thing, the only bit of it still vaguely intact, its mouth, still agape. Then that mouth closed and smiled at him. "So you accept," came a voice, though the lips didn't move further. He blinked, about to turn to Theodoros to ask if he'd heard it too, then froze. Anatolius was no longer in his room. He looked around, finding a field devoid of color. He spun sluggishly, wondering if he'd threat of exhaustion, if he was about to be approached by Karen and guided by Ferry to join his family. For a moment, he hoped so. Then a sound echoed. A footstep. A figure did approach him, but not the figure of the god he expected. A familiar figure, with lizard's legs and a thin, whip-like tail. He hissed and crouched down, sword ready, and lunged forward with a strength he thought had abandoned him. "Wrong way, King," said the woman's voice. Snidely, he whirled on her, slashing once more with his blade. Again, her voice was behind him, though this time it was an exasperated sigh. "Maybe I won't tell you what you've done to yourself. It's more fun to imagine your despair from Tartarus. Anyway," he turned, though this time confusion stayed his hand. "What I've done to myself?" The creature gave him a flat look, clearly disappointed. "Yes. You could have let me kill you. I came to your kingdom, destroyed it, slowly drained your wife, and let your son choke on his own death in the cellar. And you didn't bother to ask me why. I'm insulted, Your Majesty." He curled his lip. "Why would I want to know why? You deserve death." "Oh, I'm already dead. Good job on that, too. Though if you'd been a little quicker, you might have escaped." "What?" He paused. She'd opened her mouth, tongue tracing his blood off her fangs. He reached up, finding the wound she'd given him, though in this strange place, touching the area didn't hurt. "I've made you immortal," she said smugly, hands on her hips. "That wasn't my goal, though. I am very old, Anatolius. I was hoping to die. I was just glad for a little fuss on my way out." "Why seek me out for that?" he demanded, hand still on the wound, as if by covering it, he could avoid the immortality she promised. Something told him it wasn't the immortality he might have wanted. "I've heard of the wars you Greeks wage," she said conversationally. Lifting one hand from her hip, she cupped the air, and Anatolius jumped back as a lithe flame danced in her palm. "I carry a power to make them more destructive, as made evident by what I did to your home. The power of one creature's rage. I did not bring those soldiers, Anatolius. That was one of your allies, sending their army to defend your people. They failed. You..." His mouth went dry. "You did all this on your own?" She grinned, crooking her fingers around the flame in her hand. Upon closer inspection, that flame was bigger than it appeared, bright orange, bleeding into a pinkish hue, and then darkening to black as they curled around her cruel grin. "That was my power, Anatolius, and now it's yours." She swept forward soundlessly. Then, suddenly, her hand was on his chest, the tips of her claws digging into his flesh and caging the flame against his skin. He screamed, but before he could swing his sword again, she'd pressed it into his chest. Everything became blinding pain. The fire seemed to consume his heart, then flood through him, along the paths of his veins, setting him alight. That strange flame morphed him into a human-shaped bonfire. Everything was flame. All he knew, everything he'd ever known, was that flame. It burned away every bit of him, leaving a smoldering hunk of coal in his place. Within himself, he saw two faces. His wife, smiling at him, her dazzling beam burning away the memory of her dead in her bed. That of a young boy, older than he'd known his son, but undoubtedly him all the same, grinning playfully up at him through the mess of curls on his head. Though made of that flame, he reached out, pulling the both of them into an embrace. When he woke again, once more looking up at his own ash and blood-flecked ceiling, once more with Theodorus's face looking with concern down at him, there were tears in his eyes. Anatolius's home had been destroyed. The next story will begin now. The Man in the Lake. Since I was a child, I've feared him deeply, though I've never laid eyes upon his elusive person. I can remember vividly walking along the narrow trail that surrounded Lake Victory during the Ides of October. The water, dormant and as reflective as glass, was enraged by the fiery reds of the perishing leaves that clung desperately to the maples surrounding it. If you glanced from a distance, you'd think it was a pit of lava, scorching through the center of the earth. From the leaves that already pirouetted to the ground, a magnificent blanket of gold and orange stretched invitingly along at your feet. Consequently, as the trees became more barren, the seasonal breeze squeezed between the branches, knocking together their nimble limbs. With its powerful grasp, the whooshing breath of Mother Nature would envelop all sounds within an ear's distance of man. This type of silence was cathartic. If you closed your eyes, you could become coalesced with its gentle movement, as a spider web would become accessorized against the unbeknownst skin. The random assortment of sounds stemming from birds, the splashing of fish, an acorn falling from the tree, the ominous sounds of swaying, narrow trees like a rusted seesaw, or the mercurial patter of rain echoing against the wilted leaves, producing a light bass that was rhythmically harmonious to the ear. My grandfather always mentioned this man was always present, but you had to search persistently without fear or a cluttered mind. There was always talk of a dock, though the far side of the lake was unrecognizable from the conception, with its bends and curves to and from sight. He always said, not many find this man in Lake Victory, that it takes a special kind of person to gain his trust. The man was full of wisdom, distinguished, and had the ultimate answer to life's enigmas, he claimed. That he had experienced the greatest challenges man can face. I used to circle this lake frequently as a child, climbing trees for a better view, skipping rocks to alert him of my presence, and whatever other racket I could concoct to make myself evident as far as I could muster the courage to. Of course, this came to no avail. In my mind, the imagery of this man had always changed. Some days, he would be terrifyingly tall, his limbs slender, and his eyes were always hidden underneath a low-positioned straw hat. Other days, he would have a becoming face, accentuated by a tinge of red from physical exertion. I pictured him growing corn in small patches, picking berries from wild bushes, and fishing regularly from his forsaken dock. A fire would be ablaze during his nights, where he would sit complacently, listening to the crickets and the sounds of night. As I went through high school and college, the distraction and monotony of life had guided me far away from Lake Victory, in search of material things, to chase a dream enriched by hollow rapacity. My family's vacation home had become a distant memory. I no longer needed to acquaint this man during the fall, because he no longer could fill the void inside of my heart as he would in my youth. Or so I thought. I figured that new quest, with all the goals I had set for myself to accomplish, would provide far more solace than the man in the lake. I riddled myself with distraction, so much so I was afraid to be alone with my own thoughts, praying my responsibilities and egocentric monsters that loomed behind would never catch up to my incessant steps and thoughts. However, when things that provide no internal peace reach an expulsion point, there comes the burnout. It wasn't until I was 37 that for the first time in my life, I began to feel the weight of time bearing down upon my slouched and exhausted shoulders. It was quite amazing when I returned, how the lake had never lost its luster. However, it is also true that not many know of this lake's whereabouts. Furthermore, it would be bizarre to even encounter another bystander in your journeys around its trail. It wasn't long before I started to realize that the wonderful colors that encapsulate nature never truly lose its vigor. Only the mud-made things in life itself begin to fade as your optimism and naivety of being young dissipates as you embrace the harsh realities of existence. The future remembers history in black and white, though those who lived it always can revisit the palette that painted their peaks, whether the ravishing color of their wives' eyes when they first met, the color of their first vehicle sitting, sparkling in the driveway, or his father's blue flannel shirt, always rolled up to the elbow as he returned home from work. I remember spotting the rays of the sun streaming through the naked branches, placing my hand within its warm consultation like I did as a child. My pallid flesh began to glow as an orb would, the light bending around and through my stretched fingers as I tried to ball it up and capture it within my selfish fist. The trees, though still gallant and strong, were showing signs of age then. Their bark had become brittle and fissured. The base of some of these trees had become cavernous offering safe haven for the smaller critters. I reflected on my own appearance, with the subtle lines beginning to formulate below and beside the eyes, the random sprouts of gray hair poking through my sideburns, and the pouch of flesh that had grown dormant around my waist. I, too, was succumbing to life's greatest guarantee, and I reflected upon my mortality as I rested my hand against the withering bark in passing. The man in the lake must be growing old. It was then that again I was enlivened by the man himself as I began to intake the fresh air. Surely in my adulthood I could find this man, who must be very old himself, and not as evasive as he was many, many years before. Those creaks and snapping of branches under the light prancing of the deer would set my heart ablaze, gawking maniacally and frozen still, hoping to finally catch a glimpse of this folklore. The ground was still forgiving to my steps, still fecund from the week's rain, and my soles glided effortlessly across the discarded tapestry of leaves as they did when I was young, and through certain partitions between the blinding trees you could catch a swooping heron, the elongated neck, saintly patience, and aloof demeanor, awaiting the perfect moment to spear its beak into unsuspecting prey, just as they had in early summers. I remember the trail was as underutilized as ever at 37, stumbling atop exposed roots and stubbing my toe against jagged rock. I had been swimming through the thickets, gently whipped by the returning force, though I continued to push further than I'd ever had as a child. It wasn't long then before that allure and optimism that guided my clairvoyance towards the man in the lake previously was becoming shrouded by the enclosing nature surrounding my steps. Briefly, I remembered pausing within a small pocket of land, like an atrium within the center of the forest, and weighed my options going forward. I concluded that maybe my grandfather made up this man in the lake, that maybe I knew this all along and held on to this anecdote like one holds on to an old shirt from his past, attached to the memories it harnessed. It was then I turned towards the trail where I had come from. Then I craned my neck towards the hazardous continuance just ahead. Something within was battling, opposing forces destined for different destinies, though I allowed my city-wrought mind to win the battle once again. I turned back towards my vehicle, leaving the man behind once again. Now, I am 79. I've raised children, paid off my mortgage, made all the money one can make to live a satisfied life. However, something was gnawing in the confines of my mind. The man in the lake. Here I was again. The trail was non-existent now, but I allowed what was left of my memory to guide me towards my former footsteps upon weakened limbs. Some of the trees now had fallen, and Lake Victory was as exposed as it ever had been, as I gingerly stepped around the detriments of my journey. In brief increments, the past would flash before my eyes, and through my childhood eyes, I was allotted the opportunity to see Lake Victory in all of its former glory. My breathing was heavy, my hands calloused as I tightly grasped my walking stick. My calves were aching tremendously, though my heart thumped with the excitement and fervency of a teen. I knew this was my last opportunity. The fall always seemed to leave me speechless. How could it be? Something that I've witnessed dozens of times still enraged my love for this very earth, just as it had the first time. It was the essence of beauty, natural, pure in all of its forms, and I was appreciative that it only climaxed for a few weeks. Things of such enchantment are usually ephemeral, undeserving of the burden of obsolescence. The woman you meet in a foreign land, gone before you awake in the morning. The feeling on a motorcycle, with your hair in the wind, barely avoiding death, and the war cry that follows, with your heart nearly shattering your rib cage. It was superior to all, because it was effortless. It was the cycle of life itself. The atrium was still present, though it had shrunken to barely enough room for an elderly man such as myself. This time, I trudged through the webbing of branches and shrubbery, my face becoming sliced, and my hands bloodied by their sharp teeth. I could see the sun breaking through, about 20 feet ahead. This must have been where the man lived. I broke through the remaining brush, out into an open field. The purple and yellow flowers arched from their nesting spots, swallowed by the remaining green of October that survived by a water source. I looked upwards, glad to see the sun, receptive to its blanketing of my worn flesh. Then I looked towards the water once again, and there it was, the aforementioned dock. However, I was now forlorn, spotting no cabin in the woods, nor anywhere that a man could survive in such circumstances. I did not see his corn, nor his burn pit, where he spent his nights. I've spent my whole life, in retrospect, always comparing myself to the man in the lake, his humble attitude, his love for nature, his ability to acquire happiness without material things. His lore kept me grounded to reality. And now I was faced with the harsh truth that his existence was never crafted by veracity. Nor was this apotheosis one in which I dreamed many times before. I harped upon why my grandfather would speak so greatly of him, as if a friend. Why allow me to go on these wild goose chases, hoping to encounter some begrimed being, steeped in desolation? I approached the dock apprehensively, acknowledging its worn and derelict bones, the way it slouched towards the right side, and how the algae grew rampantly across its damp surface. I took a careful step and stopped, now hearing the lapping water gently clapping against the embankment, taking along with it the atrophied leaves, as a Viking would be sent off during his death. I took another step, stopping once again, surprised by the stability with a poke of my stick, and then decided upon shuffling towards the very edge. Here I stood, looking out over the lake that had held such a prized position within my heart. I looked down towards the surface of my hands, with all of the wrinkles and liver spots that come regretfully with age. Then I looked around the lake, witnessing its vitality once again. I understood that though some of the trees would tumble, that this very dock itself will eventually surrender to entropy, that the man in the lake may have been a farce, that ultimately I was eternally grateful for everything it had provided me in my life. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath, feeling the brisk air searching through my lungs. As I exhaled greatly, there was a surge of enlightenment that had imbued a deep revelation just as I had opened my eyes. And it was at this moment I knew I had found the man in the lake. As I looked down, just ahead of the last portion of the dock, I saw my reflection within the still water, the white hair that whisked away with the gentlest of breezes, the thick, clouded glasses that stretched across my eyes, my hunched disposition barely holding up underneath my trembling legs. This fascinating search for a character that had lived deep within all of our souls, one stripped bare of the repressed angst and uncertainty that haunted us all outside of this mystical place, with all of its simplicity and understanding of life that one tends to convolute upon their odyssey towards enlightenment. This was the ultimate lesson, and it took a lifetime to understand. I was the man in the lake, just as my grandpa had once been, and maybe one day you will be too. We think it's over, but in fact, it's just begun. The next story will thrill you in a completely different way. Cliffhanger by Lee Kendrick. I had never been to a tropical country before, but Indonesia was my friend's, and I chose a holiday destination after we had scanned the internet for tropical countries. We all agreed to go to the Indonesian island of Sumba, an island as large as Jamaica. Apparently, Indonesia boasts the most islands of any country. Unbelievably, over 17,000. My friends Michael, Bob, and I, Dave, had booked a holiday here for 2 weeks. We planned to do some snorkeling, exploring the coral reefs, and go on some boat trips to some of the Indonesian islands. For now, we were just chilling out on a sun lounger, drinking cold beers on the white sands of the Mbawana beach. The Sumba Island landscape is so rich in exotic plants and animal life. It also boasts unusual rock formations, including the Halfling Giant Stone. This is a coastal rock with a large gaping hole through it. In fact, me and the boys are just 30 feet away from it to our left. Another unusual thing about Indonesia is the Indian Ocean. It changes color, varying from turquoise to ultramarine blue to a remarkable golden orange. Another thing this part of the world is known for is its earthquakes and tsunamis. Just a few minutes ago, we felt a heavy earthquake, but this was normal for Indonesia. We were glad we weren't in a city full of buildings. The tremor only lasted for about 20 seconds, and then it just fizzled out. Nothing to worry about. Feeling hot, I decided to go for a dip in the ocean. As I slowly walked in the soft, powdery white sand towards the ocean, I sensed a foreboding. And for some reason, I noticed it was taking me longer than usual at this time of day to arrive by the ocean. I also observed pools of seawater with seaweed, crabs, and other sea creatures, which weren't there before. And I'm sure by now I would have been hearing the waves come crashing onto the beach. But the ocean seems much further away. Then it dawned on me as I stared out into the distance. There it was, a few miles away, a massive wall of water. Difficult to measure, but I would say it must be at least 50 feet high, and it was heading towards the beach. It was a tsunami. I had heard in documentaries about how the ocean suddenly withdraws from a beach, heralding a tsunami. Is this my time to die? I thought. I turned and ran as fast as I could, back towards my friends, wearing my stupid flip-flops. As I ran, I observed dozens of people lying on their beach towels, oblivious to what was about to happen. I attempted to shout to warn them, but no words would come from my mouth. I was unable to speak because I was in the grip of fear. I managed to attract a couple's attention, but they just waved back at me and continued sunbathing. I picked up a heavy shell and threw it at them, and then pointed frantically towards the wall of death. I ran and ran, painfully slowly, getting closer towards my friends. Then my friends Michael and Bob saw me. I waved with both hands, frantically in desperation, to try and warn them as I pointed back to the ocean. They just seemed to ignore me. Finally, I reached Michael and Bob to pull them away. My larynx was constricted, paralyzed. I couldn't utter one word as I pointed back towards the ocean. A bloody, gigantic blue-green wave was only a couple of 100 yards away. By now, there were people screaming everywhere on the beach. We all started running. But where? Where do we go? Do you climb a tree? The waves are too high. Do we try to outrun it? No. It's too close behind us, and it must be moving at over 100 mph per now. Do we go left or right? Maybe the wave isn't as long as the beach. very unlikely we could escape it. It probably stretches as far as the length of the beach. We kept on running in front for our lives. As the adrenaline coursed through our veins, I spotted the cliff some 50 yards away. The tsunami was now so close behind us, you could hear its thunderous roar, like a wild beast after its prey. As we managed to reach the cliff, we climbed as rapidly as we could, managing some 30 feet when the wave crashed heavily into the cliff. It demolished the halfling giant stone and engulfed the surrounding area. The beach had been swallowed up, and the ocean continued to climb, moving closer towards us. This wild beast wasn't done until it caught up with us, all three of us now exhausted and, like a gazelle, tired out with all its energy, spent. It was ready to drop and resign its fate to the beast chasing after it. I knew it was just only seconds away before the wave would claim me and my two friends. Suddenly, my heart stopped beating. To my horror, I was unable to lift my leg up to a ledge. It had got entangled in some plant's tendrils. Bob and Michael were too busy escaping to not notice me in trouble. The water was now up to my ankles as I frantically moved my foot to budge it free. The boat just wouldn't move. By now, I resigned to the fact that I was going to drown. As a 26-year-old, I was hoping for longer on this earth, and I just wish Bob and Michael escaped the wave. The water was now rising up to my neck. I closed my eyes and saw flash images of my mother, dad, sister, and brother. But wait a moment. Why hasn't the water covered me yet? I thought. The next thing I noticed was the water level was going down. It was now down to my feet, and I was able now to budge my foot free. The water was drawing slowly away, down to where the ocean and beach would normally meet. I looked up to the top of the cliff, and there, looking down, were my two buddies, Michael and Bob, waving to me, laughing. We all had a miracle escape. Sadly, many tourists didn't, and the mannequin in the lake. Johnny and Sally didn't believe me when I told them the mannequin in the water had saved me from drowning. Well, something had pulled me down, and I suspected it had been her, but I didn't mention that part to my friends. Instead, I pointed to the exact spot where I believed she'd pulled me up from the rough Lake Michigan water. They laughed out loud. It's true. Her arms swayed forward and back. I swear. I motioned with my arms the same way the mannequin had done so. The marshmallow that was supposed to be for my s'more slipped out of my fingers. Sand covered my piece. For God's sake, I'd been looking forward to making them with my buddy and his girl. Sally guffawed. You're so stupid, you know that? Plus, if you would have gotten more practice in class, you wouldn't have almost drowned. Maybe I shouldn't be here with your stupid asses, I said, glowering at Johnny, who'd had the bright idea of skipping school. Just because he'd said, but I knew why. Because of her. Johnny had skipped school so many times that the teachers probably didn't even care to find out where he was. Me, though, this was only my second time. The first time was just a few days ago, the day the mannequin had saved me. I hurled the marshmallow into the water and watched as it floated away. But when the tip of a mannequin's fingers sprang out of the water and took my piece in, a shiver ran down from the top of my head to the end of my toes. Did you guys see that? Bro! Here. Johnny split his s'more in half, the gooey center stretching like fresh out of the deep fryer mozzarella sticks. My buddy Johnny and I had been friends for 4 years now, since first grade. My only friend. All the other kids sided with him always, but when I tried talking to them, they'd ignore me. Yes, I longed for more friends, and yes, I felt a little jealous of Johnny's charisma, but I knew I was lucky to have Johnny in my life, my only friend. I helped him with his schoolwork, and he got me out of trouble. Always took the blame, no matter what shenanigans we got into. And this time was no exception. He had a fake doctor's note ready for us, and if the teachers and parents found out it was fake, he'd say he'd planned it all. Sally, though, we'd just met her this year in 5th grade. The moment I laid eyes on her, my heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. Little hearts formed around her head, just like in the cartoons. But just as quick as I'd fallen for her, she took a liking to Johnny, and they hit it off. And she often rolled her eyes at me. At the end of the pier that was yards and yards away, water splashed. I squinted to get a good look. Figured something had been thrown into the water and washed ashore, for it was usually like that. Guests came to the lake, swam, held parties. Music blasted at full volume, and instead of taking care of the lake that provided them with the best Saturday and Sunday parties and cookouts, they littered the water and the sand. Even the junkies left their pills, and needles scattered their poison, which became a scavenger hunt for the other junkies and beach cleanup crew. I took a few steps away from Johnny and Sally, then turned to tell them I'd be back, that I wanted to see what was at the pier. But Johnny and Sally began to make out. They kissed, as fake as the telenovela actors my mother watched every evening from 6 to 9. And she ignored me those 3 hours. In fact, I was on my own most of the time, whether she was home or not. She either worked, watched TV, or locked herself in her bedroom. When I arrived at the pier, I made my way under the boardwalk. The clouds that had gathered darkened the underpier, but I could still make out the figures that stood still. It was like they'd met for a secret meeting. and I'd just discovered them. "Hi," my voice said, struggling to get that one word out. Not one of them minded me, but I could hear their whispers. I inched closer. Their whispers stopped. At the end of the underpier, where the water and sand met, there she was, my mannequin, my savior. I went to her, avoiding the still figures. But as I neared them, a harsh gust of wind pushed me down to the sand, close to them. "Push," I heard them whisper. "Water," they continued. My breathing increased at the thought of these lifeless models somehow communicating. I looked up at them. The figures had their heads turned to me. How? I had no clue. They had no eyes, no mouths. In fact, there was nothing on them but the head, arms, legs, and torso that made them up. Naked, motionless. And though they weren't looking at me directly, their gaze was fixed on me. I pushed myself up and walked backward, away from them, away to the light past the underpier. But before my body touched the light, one of them blocked me. It was her. I knew it. There was a connection between us. I turned to her. The arm that had stopped me remained up in the air. "Bring," they said. And I turned to them. No realizing when, she pushed me, and again, I was down. Sand kicked in my face. No idea which of them had done it, because when I looked up, they remained still. Now, they were closer. How many were they? 9, perhaps. 10, if you counted her behind me. Where was Johnny? Sally? Still making out? Friend? Forever. Us? Never leave. They had a cultish demeanor about them. When they spoke, it was chant-like, but like they were speaking to me. "Water?" she said behind me. "Lake." "What? You want me to go into the water?" "Us. Forever. Friend." Were they recruiting me? "I can't," I cried. The sand that covered my hand scratched my eyes. "My mom, she'll get worried. My friends, they'll come looking for me soon. She hate," one of them whispered. "Who? My mom? Sally?" "He lost," another one said. "Johnny." Had I lost my friend to her? We friends. The one behind me tugged at my shirt. Her hand already pointed at the water. I turned to my friends. For a moment, it looked like Johnny had noticed me and locked eyes with me. Then, Sally turned his face away, to hers. Whether she hated me or disliked me, what was true was that she didn't consider me her friend. She was all about Johnny. I turned to the mannequins under the pier. There were 8 now, plus she, who had saved me, still behind me. The one missing was now in the lake, its torso above the water, its arms extended. "Thank you for being here to listen with me. Let's enjoy the new story together." Unexpected turbulence. I catch myself staring into the bright blue space of nothingness as I instinctively prepare another cup of tea, balancing myself with a wide stance, The tea swoops up around the cup, teasing a spill, as I manage to place it down for the woman in 12D. Her legs stretch out in front of her as she makes the most of the emergency exit row. I move down the next few rows, filling plastic cups with water and stale coffee. My mind is once again invaded with their final words to me. You're just asking for it, now being another glorified air waitress. What are you doing tonight, Soph? Krista asks, rearranging her white blouse and smoothing down her skirt as I start packing down the drinks cart. Just the usual, I guess. Wow, look at you spicing things up, she mocks, adjusting the pink scarf around her neck with perfectly manicured hands. The usual means I will be performing the same overnight trip routine of gym, jog around the city, order in cheap hotel food, and read a book. I once defied my better judgment and went out with Krista, but ended up having a panic attack in the bathroom. One of the guys at the bar had slipped an arm around my waist, and the touch of a stranger set off every warning sign in my body. I opted to get the next round of margaritas after pulling myself together, and my head didn't hit the hotel pillow until 3 a.m., before my alarm woke me up an hour later. The sunlight at this altitude is unforgiving on hungover eyes. So who are you planning on staying up with all night? I tease. Okay, so you remember how I told you about Matt? I hardly remember any of her friends' names, but I nod anyway. So he's in town and has invited over a couple of his friends from work. We are going to start at Gin Palace. You remember that cute place, right? Hidden door in the alleyway, a few lanes down from the hotel, bookcases on the wall, house music, and those huge wine glasses I like, but with all different types of fancy gin and tonics. With my back to her, as I stow away the trolley, I realize she's waiting for my confirmation. Oh yeah, I remember. Nice place. Unbothered by my obvious lack of interest, she continues. Anyway, we are starting there, and then we're trying a new spot nearby. Apparently, one of his friends knows a club that is all completely glow in the dark. And she's cut off by the sound of the seatbelt light turning on as the captain announces we are likely to experience turbulence. Our cabin manager signals us to make our way down the aisle to ensure everyone follows the instructions, stopping to help a mother of two buckle up her sticky-looking toddlers. I think about Krista and how she is so open to new experiences and people. I can already imagine how her night is going to go. She will greet her friends with a big smile, and they'll cheers to having a fun night ahead. They'll share laughs, gossip, travel experiences, and talk like they've known each other for years. She has that effect on people, myself included. A commotion seems to be happening down the back of the plane, but it doesn't sound unusual. It's probably another disgruntled passenger complaining about being restrained by the seatbelt sign. Sounds like another safety rebellion happening. I joke quietly as I meet Krista in the center of the cabin. Actually, it's some fancy businessman with an accent complaining he was assigned the wrong seat. She rolls her eyes. I think he's European, but not the sexy, swoony kind. My stomach drops from the mention of an accented businessman. I swallow the wave of anxiety and force a sarcastic smile. If only more swoony European tourists came here for holidays, hey? Well, I wouldn't be hanging out with Matt and his friends tonight. I'll tell you that. She quips. We're about 30 minutes from touchdown and about to prepare the cabin for landing. It has been a relatively easy flight. Everyone in my section seems content, and the disgruntled man appears to have quietened down. Our cabin manager approaches Krista and I. She asks us to continue scanning the rows further down while she checks in with the captain. The turbulence is almost unnoticeable as I walk toward the back of the plane, but I sense a few nervous flyers and reassure them it's okay. We're not far from our destination. Then I see him sitting in the aisle seat, second row from the back. Cold gray eyes stare right through me. His mouth curls into a tight, malicious grin. A sudden drop of the aircraft challenges my balance, and I grab onto the nearest headrest to steady myself. Apologizing to no one in particular, I turn around in disbelief. Looking over my shoulder, I check if it's just a cruel trick of my subconscious. The seat is empty. Terror begins to smother my body, and I feel my hands tremble. His face has haunted me before. I've seen him in train stations, in busy restaurants, and on crowded flights like today. I'm almost used to his memory penetrating my reality. I remind myself again that it won't be real, and my mind is playing tricks. A few confused faces bring me back, and I straighten up before retreating to the front of the plane. Pulling the curtain across behind me, I start to feel my throat close up. It's not real. He's not here. I was just imagining it. My hand is gripping my chest, as if to stop my heart from bursting out of me. The lavatory door is opened, then locked on the other side of the thin material, separating the passengers, oblivious to my silent distress. Calming my breaths to a steadier rhythm, I squeeze my elbows onto the small bench space in front of me and let my head fall into my hands. I sense I am no longer alone. The uniform suits you. Now I'm hearing things. My insides turn, and I feel vomit fighting its way up. You don't have to be shy. I know it's been a while. His words are thick with Syra, and an accent I haven't heard in over a year. My nose twitches as his cologne inches closer, infiltrating my airways with unbearable familiarity. Definitely real. I've missed you, he says casually, as if we are two old friends. I desperately will for Krista or another attendant to interrupt the reunion, but I remain compromised. He's dangerous. I know this. A plane full of bystanders and a small crew of staff. What is he willing to risk? Before I am able to answer my own thoughts, I feel a cool touch to my lower back, and I stiffen. The hairs on my neck snap out like razor blades, and my blood turns to ice. Why won't you look at me, my dear? As his hand slides further up my back, I'm screaming for help, but no sound is leaving my mouth. I'm launching my knee into his ribs, but my legs are stuck in place. I'm reaching for the intercom, but my hands are locked together on my chest. A jolt knocks us both off our balance, and I'm able to swing out of his touch, only to find us face to face. He's shorter than I remember. Silver flecks scatter the sides of his thinning hair. He's even uglier than I remember. Sir, you can't be back here. Krista drifts past the curtain and pauses in between us. Get back to your seat now, please. Of course, my dear. Pausing to smirk before he exits. Are you okay? You look like you've just seen a dead body. Krista's face is filled with concern. I bite my tongue before responding with, I wish I had, and let her know I'm fine, just a little shaken from the bumpy ride. Oh, really? I can hardly feel a thing. She moves over to the CID's system and sets the lavatory lights to red. We'll be descending soon. I straighten up my blouse and pat under my eyes to make sure any signs of horror are blurred into my smooth, professional mask. So did Mr. Fancy Pants think he'd find his seat up here? What? I can hardly hear her over the ringing in my eardrums. The European guy with the accent. Was he pestering you about his seat? Oh, I force an eye roll. He just came too far, up looking for the bathroom. Well, you'd think he's a regular flyer with that attitude. Wouldn't he know where the lavatories are on these planes by now? I shrug and move past her, pretending to be busy conducting final checks on the food and beverage lockers. Krista announces the instructions for our descent across the cabin intercom, then turns to me. I'm just going to do a final rubbish collection and seat check. You want to just wait here? You look a little pale. Yeah, if you don't mind. Thanks. I move to open up the jump seat and begin to strap myself in. Damn, I mutter. I forgot to pull back the curtain. My hands are still shaky from the monster behind it. I begin to release the seat belt and stand up, taking a deep breath in before I reach up for a handful of fabric. But a hand grabs mine first. My weight is suddenly whipped out from underneath me, and I'm falling. A wicked crack erupts from behind my ears. I can feel something warm and wet trickle down my back. You thought you could run away, and I would forget about you? He's hovering over me. Did anyone hear me fall? Bringing his slimy fingers to my face, he strokes my cheek. Paralyzed. I'm trying to run in a bad dream, but my legs won't move faster than a walk. I'm being chased, but my body has no sense of urgency. My mind is fighting to control a faulty vessel. His hand on my thigh makes me feel 18. Oh my God! I hear someone shriek. She fell. I was just checking on her. Sophie, are you okay? What happened? Krista bends down next to him, and I struggle to focus on which one of her swirling faces is real. I want to tell her to call for an emergency, but I can't seem to gather the words. She's an old friend. I can keep an eye on her if you get a first aid kit, he says, maintaining his cool composure next to me. Looking directly at him, she says, "Sir, you need to leave right now." Before she can say more, he thrusts his hand around her throat, and she is backed against the jump seat I was sitting on just a minute before. Awful screeches escape from her mouth as the veins grow by her temples. Her eyes search desperately. Watching my friend struggle for her life suddenly releases all the tightly wound ropes, holding me anchored to the floor. My hand reaches for the nearest cupboard, and a coffee pot extends from my arm and cracks down on his skull. I hit him again and again and again. "Soph," she croaks. "Sophie," Krista pleads, struggling to pull herself up from the ground. He is silent. Snapping back to my sense of self, I realize what I've done. The coffee pot drops from my hand, and a few wet drops slide off my face with it. "We need a doctor. Is anyone a doctor?" I yell, and hear the gasps echo down the aircraft. I was fresh out of high school and approaching my move-out date assigned by my parents when I started working. It was said to be the best restaurant in town. We had regular guests from all over the world who stayed in the hotel above. I didn't notice it at first, how I was always rostered on the section of mostly dinner for once. I received generous tips and learned about the different places they were all from. I enjoyed being praised for my efforts and attentiveness during the meal. The mostly male and outspoken staff generally left me alone, which suited me just fine. Though occasionally they'd comment on my appearance, telling me I needed more makeup if I had tired eyes or to put on a smile when I was clearing tables. The manager would joke about my tight ass and even grabbed it once to check the merchandise in front of the kitchen crew. Mr. Ackerman would arrive every night at 5 p.m. and order a glass of Syrah when he was in town. He'd sink into the couch at the bar and chat to the staff about life in Europe and his work in the oil business. I caught his eyes scanning my movements a few times, but we didn't speak until I was placing the napkin at his table and asking, "The usual again, sir? Make sure you take good care of him." I was frequently reminded by my manager, Colin. At the mandatory Christmas work party, we had dinner at a local pub, and Colin insisted we joined him for drinks after. Once a girl refused these nights out drinking, and she shortly had her hours cut and tips reduced until she had no choice but to quit. At the bar, we ran into some of our regulars. Mr. Ackerman seemed pleased to see us and eyed my black dress thoroughly before delivering a sharp wink. "You should go chat with him. Keep up the good service, you know," my manager instructed with a pat on the ass, a glass of wine in hand. Courtesy of the man next to me, I sat there, struggling to answer the questions over the blasting music. I noticed how misplaced Mr. Ackerman was in his business casual attire, surrounded by partying patrons, 10 or 20 years his junior. "Sorry, I didn't hear you." I leaned into his side ever so slightly, struggling to keep any distance between us. His hand slid around my thigh in response. "I'll miss seeing you when I go back home." "I'm sure you'll be fine." There were flowers in my locker the following week, and a note saying he looked forward to seeing me again. I tried talking to Colin about how it made me uncomfortable and thought it was unprofessional. "Sophie, this is professional. You're making connections and bringing in regular money. Keep up the excellent work." He checked in a month later and greeted me with 3 kisses on the cheek during a busy service. I wanted to run. I wanted to wash his touch off in a scorching shower. Instead, I smiled and continued serving overpriced glasses of champagne. Then came dinner. Colin called me before my shift, asking me to wear the same black dress from the Christmas party. "It's a formal kind of occasion tonight. We need to be on an extra level." Too afraid to disobey, I reluctantly arrived with black kitten heels to match, only to find I was to be served that night instead of serving. Promised my pay as usual, plus a tip from the foreign businessman, I followed orders. We sat at the candlelit table and discussed his travels and work in the private dining room. I actively avoided any conversation directed back to me. A package with a silver bow was placed between us when the plates were cleared. "For you, my dear." I carefully unwrapped it to find an expensive-looking perfume. Only the best for my favorite girl. I don't know what to say. Forcing a smile, which ached my entire face. "Say nothing," he whispered, pulling my hand toward him before placing his lips on my skin. I resisted every urge to whip it away and smack his jaw, but I felt another pair of eyes on me. I glanced over to the room door to find my manager peering in, nodding in approval. Everyone knew. They all played a part in it. They helped print letters, deliver flowers, and even gave him my phone number. I was a pawn in their game. Mr. Ackerman must have offered more money than I could have imagined to the entire hotel staff. What other motive did they have? Or was it just a funny joke to them? What followed in the months after will stay with me for the rest of my life. I eventually cracked the morning after being requested to join Mr. Ackerman in his room for the night. I burst through the lobby and headed straight to the manager's office. I'd saved enough of my generous tips to book a flight to the other side of the world with an approved visa and an interview with an airline. I could finally escape. Colin laughed in disbelief of my resignation and career change. "You're just asking for it, now being another glorified air waitress." I dropped my apron on his desk and left without another word, going over the interaction in my head, making sure I didn't let it slip where the airline was based. The thud of the wheels touching down sends excruciating pain up my scalp. as I continue applying pressure to my wound. Krista is sitting opposite me, with her face slowly returning to color, squeezing my hand. The emergency services are waiting at the gate, and I brace myself for the chaos about to erupt when we open the doors. I don't know what is going to happen. All I know is that my chest feels lighter, and I can breathe again. So today's story has come to an end. Or perhaps it never really ended. There are mysteries still there, questions still unanswered, and sometimes things that seem to only exist in stories can creep into reality in unexpected ways. Are you sure that when you turn off the sound, everything around you will still be normal as before? Or is there something watching you? Either way, always remember that these are just stories, or at least we want to believe that they are. If you like moments of suspense, tension, and breathlessness, don't forget to follow me so you don't miss the next stories. And next time, when you come back, make sure you are ready, because what awaits you may be even scarier than you thought. See you again if you still have the courage to continue listening.